realistically, are we 10 years away from that? Where we'll see a huge number of brands come out of India?
So making a prediction about the future is very hazardous.
BeerBiceps steel. I know.
As strong as your biceps. Every country has navigated this path. First starting with assembling, that learning to walk and then doing more value added is the running part.
And the final conversation is probably building your own brands.
Absolutely. The branding part is a sprinting part. Google or Apple or any of these companies, their market value compared to the book value on the balance sheet is much higher.
There's a part of me that's tempted to stop podcasting and get into manufacturing of some sort. The least I can do if I don't get into manufacturing myself is have people from the audience actually get into it and then do what I dreamt of doing. I'm going to be stuck here doing podcasts all my life. No, I'm kidding. Pardon my language, but what the fuck has gone wrong with Pakistan? like economically speaking.
I would put it this way. When you have power without responsibility, that is a recipe for bad governance.
The Modi government's focus is on infrastructure and it's probably going to be on infrastructure until it's completely set.
You can't put the blame for this on the entrepreneurs. It is about policy. It's not something that actually will happen overnight.
KV Subramanian is one of the most respected Indian economists. He served as the 17th Chief Economic Advisor to PM Narendra Modi. This was during the phase of the lockdown. On this episode, he's shared his stories, his economic predictions, as well as his worldview after serving the country for all these years. This is KV Subramanian on TRS. Welcome to the Ranveer Show. KV Subramanian, sir. How are you?
I'm doing very well, Ranveer. How are you?
Great. We had a fantastic first conversation in Hindi where we covered the basics of economics. We've done a few of those with one of your colleagues, Sanjeev Sanyal, on the show. And fortunately for me, this audience that we're catering to now is pretty advanced with a lot of the things they know. So I feel like we'll be able to talk at a very deep level. So
let's see how we go.
Okay. Speaking about deep levels, you switched from being an engineering grad into eventually becoming the chief economic advisor for the Indian government, into becoming India's representative at the IMF. Are these related roles?
They are. I think the chief economic advisor and the ED, there are many, people before me who actually have similarly, had such roles.
What does a CEA do, aise?
Good question. So the CEA is supposed to actually be so there are many ways I can put this.
Sure.
One is that he's supposed to give advice on economic policy, economic aspects to the in the finance ministry and to the finance minister, and also to the, if possible, to the to the prime minister as well.
My very raw assumption was that you work with PM Modi and you work with the finance ministry, which is currently with Nirmala Sitharaman. But do you work with the other ministries as well? Do you work with all of them?
So yes, you are right in saying that the major interactions that I had was with the Honorable Prime Minister and with the Honorable Finance Minister. But I did have interactions with others as well. In early on, actually on some of the, for instance, Ministry of Commerce. That's as important. Other ministries as well. Some of the infrastructure ministries. Interactions with those. Which basically go and implement or do the infrastructure. Similarly, some of the ministries at that time, it was actually the ministry that manages all the public sector companies, etc. So all those actually come into the department that manages that. So similarly, some of the people in Niti Aayog that actually were working on healthcare. Actually, they were an important element. So I'll go back to what the flesh that a CA puts on his or her time as a CA is actually depends on how much one he or she wants to contribute. And there, so you basically create the canvas, the painting on the canvas, based on how ambitious you are about contributing to the nation.
and knowing fully well that some of your suggestions will get rejected.
Yes, I think that's something which is, so that is par for the course, which is, if I, let's say, took 5 ideas, to the Honorable Prime Minister, some of those ideas actually may not, for instance, may not have, sort of fructified as well. Maybe there's some more work required. I've seen, for instance, some ideas that I might have taken to him, which have been implemented later as well, after I've sort of relinquished office too. And some ideas may actually, maybe the time is not right, or maybe, it's not working at this point in time. But that's part of, that's part of the role of a advisor, of a CA, where, in fact, I would look at if basically 2 or 3 ideas, get implemented, I think that's a very good hit rate. And this, for those of us who actually came from research and, especially publishing in the, top outlets in the world, this was something that we were trained for. Because if you take, for instance, if you have to, as a finance scholar or an economic scholar, if I have to actually send papers, in the top journals, the acceptance rates in these journals actually is, 5-6%. Okay. And so, working on an idea and seeing that idea getting sort of not level of acceptance that you would ideally like is something that is par for the course for a researcher. In fact, I oftentimes tell, those who want to do a PhD students, I would tell them that if you take, let's say, the 5-6 years of doing a PhD, and then there's what is concept of getting tenured, which means you have a permanent job, once you have tenure, which takes anywhere between 7 to 8 years. So together, basically about 12 years, starting from your PhD program. If you multiply it with the number of days, it's about 5,000 days approximately, 12 times, So if in 5,000 days, if you have 5 good days, what are these 5 good days? These are the days when the editor of a top journal sends you an email saying your paper has been accepted. Your career is made. So 5 out of 5,000 is 0.1%, which means 99.9% of the times you are either actually working towards success or you are failing. And that is something which you get well trained for. If you basically work on 5 ideas and 3 of them make it to top journals, that's a very good hit rate.
We got to move to a spicier part of the episode, sir. We've spoken about the current Indian economy in a bunch of episodes, even in the last Hindi episode that we just did. The Modi government's focus is on infrastructure, and it's probably going to be on infrastructure until the infrastructure is completely set, which is possibly after maybe 1 or 2 more terms. That's how long it takes to build out a country as large as India with the kind of population we have. I remember in the last one, I also asked you, other than infrastructure, what is being focused on?
Yes.
We spoke on manufacturing.
Correct.
Because basically, when you help the world of manufacturing in any country, you give rise to a lot of jobs. You stabilize the economy because people have predictable incomes, etc. You increase exports.
Correct. So, I would want to, for our viewers here on manufacturing, because there is a lot of debate on this, and especially, for instance, this idea, which I was involved in, the PLI scheme, for instance. So I want to explain to our viewers, see, in 1991, we liberalized the economy. But when it comes to, enabling or empowering our manufacturing sector firms, policy really did not do very much. Allow me to explain this as well.
You mean since 1990 till now?
Till recently, and till the sort of this government came into power. So let me explain this, because think about a manufacturing firm. What are the costs that it has? It actually, manufacturing firm uses power. A manufacturing firm needs labor, needs land. It needs to actually transport whatever it produces. And it also needs to actually, spread its fixed costs over a large denominator, what we economists call economies of scale. So these are 5 inputs, right? If your land is actually, you can't go and acquire land as easily or at reasonable prices compared to firms that you have to compete with globally, let's say, 10-20% higher land cost. Your labor is basically, labor reforms have not happened. And so, adjusted for quality of, labor, you're paying 10-20% more again. if let's say power is not available 24/7, it's not reliable, so there may be power cuts, let's say, and you're not getting adequate power, then again that cannot help. Net, if you take into account the opportunity cost, time lost, etc., you are actually paying a much higher cost for power, maybe 20% again. If you actually take then transportation, because the roads are not that great, other firms in other countries are shipping maybe at in half the time, and maybe without any damages, etc., because there are no potholes and things like that. So that adds maybe another 10-20%, right? And finally, if you basically have created laws in such a way that firms prefer to be dwarfs, which means they, even despite aging, they continue to be small, then your fixed costs are actually not being spread over a large denominator. If you're a firm that has 100 employees versus a firm that has 1,000 employees, the same fixed costs are being spread over a much larger denominator when it's a 1,000 employee firm rather than a 100 employee firm. And the kind of laws that we've had actually has, when a firm reaches 95, it basically, a promoter wants to create another firm so that he doesn't get deprived of some of the benefits that you get from being less than 100. That has encouraged this phenomenon of dwarfism. Now put all this together. On each of these costs, each of these inputs, the Indian firms basically were incurring costs that were 15-20% at least larger than the somebody who's actually even the most innovative entrepreneur can reduce through his ideas, can maybe bring his cost down by 20%, 30%. But when you add these up, this is amounting to 100% at least, right? So policy, and this is something which is so important, I have to emphasize that our policy has basically not, and this is not, we can't put the blame for this on the entrepreneurs. It is about policy, which did not go and work on these, what we economists call factor markets. These are the factors of production: labor, land, power, transportation, economies of scale. Each of these factors, these are all markets themselves. There's a labor market, there's a market for power, there's a market for land. We did not work on actually making these markets competitive at all. And so, our firms have not been competitive. And and this is, nobody has an overnight wand, it's basically to sort of want to create overnight magic. It is, the emphasis has been, and this is something which I, took sort of special attention to, brought special attention to, is, working on these factors of production, cost, making them, for instance, the labor law reform, actually the bill was passed in parliament. If you look at infrastructure, the emphasis on power is on, logistics, railways, roads, etc., so that logistics costs go down. MSME definitions have been changed so that firms can grow bigger. In other words, we encourage children that can become giants rather than encouraging dwarfs. Taxpayer money should go into into investing in children that can become giants rather than dwarfs. And these together actually will really help in encouraging manufacturing. So it's not something that actually will happen overnight. Patient work, especially from policymakers on each one of these inputs, is, I think, important. Each one of these markets, so that the cost of that particular input becomes as good as the level that other global firms have. That is important. Now the PLI scheme comes in basically as the bridge to this new, so the equilibrium that we've had, this is one where all these costs are actually higher for our firms. And while policy happens, and these costs are actually reduced through emphasis on policy, we have to have Indian firms actually which will be there to do manufacturing, right? So, you have to, in policy, you can't pretend, in academia, we can actually, the bad equilibrium to good equilibrium, you actually write it in a paper, done. But in the real world, you actually have to create that bridge from the bad equilibrium to the good equilibrium. And that is what the PLI scheme really is. And this is something that is actually, policymakers have to understand, have to realize that if you did not have the PLI scheme, by the time the good equilibrium comes, where our costs are all lower, if there aren't enough firms to actually, domestic firms, where will the jobs get created?
Got it. Cool. Is this what China had done right in the last 30-40 years?
Yes, very much. In fact, China not only did it, make each of these inputs at the same level, through state-driven capitalism, they would also give sort of implicit subsidies as well, so that the costs for Chinese firms on these factors of production were actually lower than than global firms. And they of course utilized the fact that they had huge demographic dividend when they in the 1980s, huge labor force, right? And so labor costs were lower. They used that to to really enable manufacturing. Okay. Not just China. In fact, actually and this is a chapter that we had written in the economic survey, 2019-20 economic survey. If you look at any firm, or look at any country that has become an export powerhouse or become a manufacturing powerhouse, they've become that by first actually learning to assemble stuff and then moving into more value added. I'll give you an example from India itself.
More value added.
I'll explain that. Okay. I'll explain that. So if you take, Maruti in India, right? In the 1980s, late 1980s, Maruti set up shop, but it was a joint venture with Suzuki. So what would happen? All the components, would come in. They would be imported and they would be assembled, in India. It was only assembly. So the Maruti car that initially came out was all the components were actually manufactured in Japan, and they were just shipped in here and it was assembled here. If you're just doing the assembling, then you're not adding as much value. That's why I meant the value added. In contrast, if you are manufacturing those components as well, then obviously you are actually, you are sort of creating more value in India itself. Now, this happened in the 1980s when we were only assembling the cars then. But since then, the entire ancillary sector, the entire industry for manufacture of components, all that has developed. And that is how countries move as well. You don't learn to actually run before learning to walk. And in the context of export powerhouse manufacturing, assembly is that learning to walk, and then backward integration, which is basically doing more value added, is the running part. We have to actually, it's that territory, every country, Japan, China, we showed that through very, very robust evidence as well. Every country has navigated this path, first starting with assembling and then going into value added. So some of the criticism that comes actually on this, that, assembling is basically PLI scheme is being given, let's say given for electronics assembly. That is something that's a sine qua non. It's essential, to be able to then move into, to value-added manufacturing of components as well. It's not as if you have a magic wand and say, today we will manufacturing, electronics end to end. That capability for that doesn't get built unless you've learned how to do the assembly. These are all things that are actually part of practical policy making.
And the final rung in that value add conversation is probably building your own brands.
Absolutely. Oh, I'm so glad you said it. I think that's a very, very important part, because brands actually, when you look at that, that's where the maximum value comes from.
Like Germany's done it very well.
Yes, intellectual property, right? Gives you, you get the rewards from intellectual property. If you look at, for instance, and there's something as a finance scholar, I look at, if you look at, let's say what is called the market to book ratio of a company, right? If you look at take a company like, let's say, Google or Apple or any of these companies, right? Their physical assets are not that many. Their market value compared to the book value on the balance sheet is much higher. Where is that coming from? That is coming from the brand that they've built. And that is the last step. You absolutely got it right. That having first learned to run, having first learned to walk, then learn to run. The branding part is a sprinting part, where you can sprint and start winning the sprint races as well.
Realistically, are we 10 years away from that? Where we'll see a huge number of brands, international brands come out of India and then actually help the Indian GDP?
So, generally, so making a prediction about the future is very hazardous. But, with that caveat, I would say 10 years is a very reasonable frame. If you're able to, if 10 years later, Indian brands are known in the advanced economies, then I'd be very glad. For instance, today here, in India, everybody knows, Samsung, everybody knows, let's say, Hitachi, it's a company like, if similarly, let's say, maybe an Indian brand is known in, and I'm not taking examples just so that, people don't perceive me to be biased to one or the other. Just any brand, any Indian brand, actually, as long as it is an Indian brand that actually can go and become big in the world, great for India.
BeerBiceps steel.
Why not? Beer steel.
Yeah. Why not?
Or bicep steel.
Why not?
As strong as your biceps.
Why not? See, I'll be
So I'll
very...
give you a tagline for the ad as well when you create, a bicep steel as strong as Ranveer's biceps. Steel, that is that.
I'm always in for the BeerBiceps validation. That's all I'll say. But I'll be very raw here with you, sir. Breaking away from this economics conversation, I've had so many government officials on the show, people who are associated with the government, politicians. Everyone points Indian youth towards this manufacturing domain because I'm understanding that it directly helps you guys in terms of your goals.
Yeah.
And the government's goal is to make India prosperous.
Correct.
So if an Indian person wants to help make the country more prosperous, probably manufacturing is one of a very nice opportunity to kind of grow.
Yes, yes. And in particular, to actually create jobs for our youth.
Yeah.
It is incredibly important.
It's a self-actualizing job to have as a manufacturing-based entrepreneur because you're helping your country, you're helping yourself, you're doing good in the world.
Correct.
I'm so tempted. I'm not saying this as a joke, but there's a part of me that's tempted to stop podcasting and get into manufacturing of some sort because of just how much I know about this.
Yeah.
The least I can do if I don't get into manufacturing myself is have people from the audience actually get into it and then do what I dreamt of doing, but I'm going to be stuck here doing podcasts all my life. No, I'm kidding. I love this.
But let me add one aspect to this, Ranveer.
Sure.
There was this famous Nobel laureate called Milton Friedman, who came up with, and I'm just trying to explain manufacturing using.
Sure.
So he has this hypothesis that is called the permanent income hypothesis. This is jargon for actually what is something which is a very simple idea, which is that, our consumption, any individual's consumption or a household's consumption is dependent on what we expect our level of permanent income to be. An example of this is, suppose you get a promotion, right? When you get a promotion, you expect now your permanent income to be higher than what it was before the promotion. And so you may go and buy a bigger car, or you may actually buy a bigger house. Maybe it's not a bigger house, maybe actually from Warsaw, maybe you might go to, South Mumbai, for instance, right? And that's just increasing consumption. So consumption at the level of an individual household or an individual depends on what they think their permanent income is going to be in future. Now, here's where the role of manufacturing comes in, because when you have a job in the organized sector, right? Unless you goof up really badly, right? You're going to have that job for maybe the next 20, 25, 30 years. And, a steady stream of income is going to come every month. Then you don't have uncertainty about, what are you going to earn next month? And that then enables you to plan your consumption and increases consumption. That's what Milton Friedman, said. And when you take that and apply it to the, to the context of manufacturing, when manufacturing basically really picks up, and it started picking up already, and but we have to do more on this, the jobs will get created in large numbers. People who have jobs, because jobs in the organized sector, in organized manufacturing, they'll know they actually have a certain permanent income. Using that, they'll actually go and spend more money. Demand will go up in the economy. Anticipating that such demand increases, firms will invest more. You could do your, bicep steel, for instance, and others. And that's how the virtuous cycle, which really drives economic growth, moves fast. So
if manufacturing takes off as a sector, it's a catalyst for general economic growth.
So let me, we are sort of misquoted here. I don't think we should say if, it's already started moving. When it really sort of, we sort of finished the entire stage of, all the stuff that has to be done on manufacturing, then, lots of jobs would get created and all the stuff that I'm talking about will fructify.
Okay. You want to do a short question and answer round on?
Yeah, sure.
pardon my language, but what the f is gone wrong with Pakistan? Like, what's up? Like, economically speaking, everyone knows the geopolitical angles, the military controls everything in that country. The wrong guys are making the decisions at the top, and that's what's led to this over many years.
I would say it's governance.
Okay. Wrong policy again?
Wrong policy that stems from governance. Eventually, see, good policy is actually an outcome of good governance. Similarly, then, bad policy is a outcome of bad governance.
Which is an outcome of what? The wrong people being in power.
So I would put it this way: when you have power without responsibility, that is a recipe for bad governance.
When you're in a position of power for individualistic.
No, I'm just saying actually you have power, but you don't have as much responsibility. For instance, and this is, by the way, I'm not an expert on Pakistan. I'm just basically, I've researched governance and especially corporate governance, and based on that, I'm speaking here. That if let's say you have the power to make a lot of decisions, but you're not held accountable for the outcomes that come from those decisions, then you have power, but you don't have responsibility. And, and that is a recipe for disaster.
So because the military controls everything there, if there are wrong decisions, there's not really outcomes.
No, they end up making the decisions, but they're not held accountable for the outcomes that come out of it.
Okay. And they'll probably never be held accountable.
Maybe not. I think some of the events that were happening in the last 1 year, at least there was an attempt to try and make them more accountable. But I think that died a very quick death.
Okay. The obvious engineering logic here is, if you can see that shit is going to hit the roof, why don't you prevent it a little earlier?
It's because of self-interest.
Okay.
It's, see, even self-interest, and here actually I'll speak from a sort of a spiritual perspective. Self-interest can be elevated self-interest or can be naked self-interest. When it's elevated self-interest, you want to do good, let's say, for the country because you derive satisfaction out of doing good. Or maybe you want to actually leave a brilliant legacy, right? People remember you for the work that you did. That's elevated self-interest. In contrast, you just want to basically make a ton of money, whichever way it comes. Basically you're sort of taking, let's say, a taxpayer's money. That's naked self-interest. Elevated self-interest, I think, is leads to good governance and thereby to good policy. Naked self-interest, where you basically just I, me, myself, kind of, two hoods with everybody else. I'll just basically self-aggrandize. I think that leads to bad governance and then eventually to bad policy as well.
Effectively, this would mean that if our manufacturing is on point, if we are functioning fantastic as a bit of a bazaar for the Gulf and the West, that's what will really enable even more success over the next 25 hours. Yeah, that's the variable. Yes. You want to give some context on exactly what's happened? Like, how is this?
So I think the important context here is, after the global financial crisis, the forces of globalization, trade, etc., have actually suffered pushback. With, even for instance, the US saying America first, and this has happened in other countries as well, right? So some of the forces that, enabled globalization, up until the global financial crisis, it was actually on an upward momentum, but then since then, sort of has started declining. So in that context, I think, in enabling trade from India, into India and via the Gulf, the Middle East, into, the advanced economies, Europe and the US, I think is a very, very important antidote in some sense to this, sort of trend against globalization.
Right.
At the same time, of course, this is India's, sort of play against the, the Belt and Road Initiative as well. So, strategically, it's very important too.
Okay. Wow. Damn. So geopolitics is one massive factor in your role always. Like studying it, understanding what's
Understanding it, actually, because, see, one of the things that you have to remember is that, a growing tide lifts all boats. and a sinking tide actually buries all boats. And so, understanding the global economy, I think, is extremely important for anybody who actually, wants to do policy making at the national level.
Yeah. One of the things I find very fascinating about your world of economics is that I always assume that for a country to become richer, other countries probably need to get slightly poorer, like lose 1 rupee and then they collect and come here. And then I realized that's not true.
No, yeah. In fact, that's why I was actually sort of left thinking that is sort of, portraying it as a zero-sum game.
And it's not.
It's not.
Yeah.
Let me say it need not be.
Like there is a utopia where every country could get richer together.
I don't think I would say utopia. If you saw basically what happened before the global financial crisis, right? At least till till 2008, 2009, the US, of course, benefited from very low cost imports. China benefited as well by growing its economy. It was win-win, at least to some sections of society. Yes, in the US and in the advanced economies, some of the less skilled people, some of the people who basically worked in manufacturing sector jobs, etc., they lost jobs because manufacturing got shipped out of the US into China, for instance. But as a consumer, the American consumer benefited enormously, right? So in that way, it was a win-win. So I'm saying it has been a win-win. But with some caveats, and I think the new form of globalization can actually, using this, using the corridor, can be one that can be also sympathetic to some of the problems that come from those that lose out because of globalization. So it's a more sort of compassionate form of globalization rather than a very sort of cold-blooded one.
I know this is a very complex question that I'm asking you, but I'll still go ahead, which is, could you paint a simple picture of the global economy currently in 2023? Of course, I know you'll have to highlight America, you'll have to highlight Europe, the Gulf, Africa, and Asia in general. We don't really speak about Asia, especially the Far East and all this. It's never come up on the show. So I'd let you take it in whatever direction you think is best.
So I think the first thing to recognize when we talk about the global economy today is that India is likely to be the bellwether for growth, in the global economy for the foreseeable future. That's the first aspect. We'll be the, quite likely the fastest growing economy, among all the large economies, and thereby contributing to world growth, possibly the most. When you look at the US, I think the US, there have been some, in my opinion, policy aspects that could have been possibly, done differently. But US, I would always sort of be careful to bet against, because it's still the country where the best people, choose to go and live and work. And so by the fact that they actually get still, the world's best talent is something that you have to keep in, factored. When it comes to Europe, I think Europe, in my opinion, faces structural problems. Maybe the best may be behind. When it comes to China, I think we've already spoken the demographics and also some of the problems on their financial sector, the kind of investment, overinvestment that they've done. All that will certainly mean this decade will be very tough for them, and maybe even going forward, things may be actually, may not be very rosy. When it comes to, I think in the Asia, I think the Middle East, there are some pockets of good opportunity there, growth, which because there are sort of important changes in the society also that is happening there, which will further sort of and lead to better economic policy. For instance, possibly increase in female labor force participation. That may be something that can actually make a big difference to in the Middle East. I think Africa, I am still I don't have a very clear view at this point in time. There's enormous potential there for sure. But I think there's also, an enormous opportunity thereby to actually reap the benefits of good governance there. And I think I'll leave it at that.
Wow. Okay. Is Africa ever going to be a continent that India can look at as a target for exports?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think Africa is is a very important continent for India. Both in terms of sharing some of our lessons on on development, on growth, but at the same time also as a partner, in trade and economic growth.
Okay. What about the Far East?
Yes, I think Far East for sure, because they are, as now, through some of the steps that are being taken now, by the current Prime Minister, I think he's built good relationships there as well. And given the economic energy that may come there with the, sort of some of the policy changes, I think those will be very good opportunities for us as well. And there may be also important changes that may be happening, in the Far East, given climate change and what that would mean for their own economic policies as well. So that could also be important opportunities for India.
Okay. How much does climate change affect an economist's job? Because only recently do I hear
Yes.
people in governance talking about climate
Yes,
change all over
yes,
the world, not
yes,
just in India.
Yes. No, I think if you had asked an economist, let's say 10 years back, I don't think he would have, talked about the importance of climate change for the macroeconomy or the economy at large. But today, I think, it can pose an important macro risk as well.
Because it affects agriculture primarily?
It can affect agriculture for sure, but it can also, through natural disasters, can create damage and thereby leave, some of the vulnerable sections of society, in quite a significant amount of distress. And so, building those safety nets for such people, I think that also becomes very important. Of course, apart from, focusing on agriculture, but also even in terms of the use of energy, the kind of energy that, you want to focus on for your growth, that also becomes very important as well.
I have a very morbid question I wish to ask you, but that's what we do on podcasts. So. There was these movies like The Day After Tomorrow where they actually show a mass flooding, etc. We're seeing sort of versions of these natural disasters happening all over the world constantly.
Mm-hmm.
If we continue the way we're continuing, and if we don't talk enough about climate change, and I think if enough policies are not created about climate change, probably the 2030s and the 2040s will be very catastrophic in terms of worldwide floods, etc. So as an economist, say hypothetically you're in that position where now you're dealing with a much smaller population.
Mm-hmm.
The morbidity of this question is that what if climate change causes a huge amount of death? Because that's how nature works.
Yeah.
If you abuse nature, nature will abuse you back.
Yeah.
And it probably just like clean up a lot of humanity.
Yeah.
How does the economics of that new world work?
So, I would put that down as a sort of collection of unknown unknowns. And therefore, whatever I say here will be, sort of speculative. If somebody goes and checks when that event happens 10 years later, I may be wrong. But with that caveat, I would say, it depends on, of course, it's a very morbid, sort of line of thinking. But within that, if, for instance, people who are, whom we let's say lose in the workforce, if they're very skilled, then I think the impact will actually be much greater than if they are not as skilled. I think the way this comes out is, it seems unfair. Maybe it doesn't have it may seem a little cold-blooded as well, and I'm sorry about
it's a cold-blooded question, so I have put you here, so I should be apologizing, but I don't feel like apologizing because it's a podcast.
But I think the silver lining, therefore, to that is that if you can use technology to one, be able to anticipate a lot of this, and thereby also, do prediction well, but not just predictions at the macro level, but localized. For instance, where is it that this, disaster is going to possibly happen? Move people, come up with, when I say technology, I don't mean only in terms of just tech, right? But, in terms of the sort of the response model, being able to quickly move people, maybe a million people within a day, right? Like that kind of technology as well, to safe places. And I think there is potential for such sort of quote unquote models to be developed. And if that happens, then we can certainly limit the damage. So it would require, us to be able to predict very well. So, the sort of the models that will have to predict these will have to, possibly use a lot of AI, because we're talking about unknown unknowns, not just unknowns here. So that we get the prediction in a localized manner, saying, it is going to be, let's say, this particular 5-kilometer tract, in this particular district, let's say in this particular state. That's where the flooding is going to be so large, and so move people there, or maybe in a town, or we move people. So the prediction and the response, both of these are, I think, very important. But suppose, let's say, and worst case scenario, despite all this preparation, on the prediction technology, on the response, technology or response mechanisms, if still, let's say we end up losing a large chunk of humanity, then again, using technology to quickly train people, those that survive, I think will also be important in being able to, get over this. So I hope I've been able to answer this question sympathetically, but it is a morbid thought.
Yeah, this is true for a zombie apocalypse as well, or any extremely morbid movie scenario. This is how the government would react.
Yeah, no, I think that's true. I'm glad you're asking this, because it's always sort of good to be prepared for the worst and hope for the best.
One last question for you, sir, because there's no way that I can cover everything that I wish to cover in just one episode. So I'm assuming that I'm going to see you again in life at some point, and we will continue. And in that one, we'll talk about the IMF and all these other aspects of your life.
Sure.
But you've had one crazy life, like honestly, like from your childhood to IIT to cricket to MBA to economics to the government to whatever you're doing now. It's too many things. One lesson from all of this.
I think just be true to yourself. That's the work hard, don't put on a pretense. I think those are the lessons that if there's one thing that I would give, myself some credit for, it is that I've always had good intent, which means that good intent has been, even since the time when I was actually, before I went to, university as well, I was very clear I didn't want to live a life of I, me, myself. Maybe my father, sort of inspired me, instilled the kind of sacrifices he made for us, I think inspired me. But that is one part actually that I had absolute clarity about, that I wanted to do something, that was just beyond I, me, myself. And I think this is something which, I'm sure you will relate to. And anybody who's had some kind of a journey on the spiritual path, will also relate to that. We all have, a small mind and a big mind. The small mind is, just doing, I, me, myself, I, me, myself, I, me, myself all the time. The big mind actually, says, let's stop that chatter of I, me, myself all the time, and let's think a little. Let's get out of that and think beyond. And shall we do something that is actually for somebody else, and thereby, get enormous satisfaction from that? I think, I would. That's one lesson that I would actually take for myself more than anybody else. In that intent, or listening to the big mind, and not just getting consumed by the small mind within me.
Okay. I think it's about the energy you give out. So that intention you carry in your heart eventually becomes the vibe that you give out in the world. And the world
I hope
sends
so.
it back to you, because
I
when
hope
your
so.
intention is to help
Yeah.
comes to you.
No, that I think is a very, 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 very good point, very profound point, which I think only somebody who's had who sort of vetted his feet in, in the spiritual path can say. Because I mean, I've myself sort of felt, and people may call this unscientific or whatever, and I don't care. But I will say that when you have good intention, I think the universe supports you.
You think economics as a subject, especially when you're doing practical economics,
Mhm.
you've worked with the biggest country in the world,
Mhm.
technically,
Mhm.
the largest population. Does it change you on some spiritual level?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. I think to me, the 3 years working as a CA was, an intensely spiritual experience for me. I mean, that's maybe a topic for a later conversation. But see, it's one thing to learn principles, about basically, your own ego, your things like the small mind, big mind. It's one thing to learn that in scriptures, and another thing to actually implement it in reality. I think the test really comes. This is something that I've genuinely believed. The spiritual path is not about intellectual. It's not about reading and being able to show off your knowledge about. It is about how much are you able to imbibe in your life. That is the true test of spiritual life. And I think for me, I look back at these, the 3 years as, for me, it was an intensely spiritual experience, a very uplifting experience as well.
Because every thought and decision is going to affect a huge mass of people.
Yes.
You're dealing with so many souls all at once through that
Yeah.
one sentence on your paper.
Correct. Actually, through that, but also that I think thinking like that can actually make you, sort of maybe paralyzed. Saying, oh, what I'm thinking is, can affect so many people, etc. That is, I would capture that as sort of the most important shloka in the Bhagavad Gita, shloka 47 in chapter 2, karmanyavadhikarasya ma phaleshu kadachana ma karma phale heturubhuhu mate sangosto karmani. That, I think, teaches you that even though you have that goal of basically wanting to do good for it, you have to take your mind out of that outcome and just focus on the effort. I think to me that was an exemplification of. So I'll share. I used to do this when I used to take exams, for instance. I went in, the mindset with which I would go into an examination was that those 3 hours or the 2 hours, 3 hours that I'm writing that examination, my duty is only to answer the questions. Not think about, what is the outcome of the exam, how am I doing in the exam, how is everybody else doing in the exam. That is all on the outcome. My dharma, in the next 3 hours is only to answer the question, not judge it, and that is what I would keep my focus intensely on just answering the questions. To me, that was the exemplification of this particular shloka. On just focus on the effort, and the outcome, takes care of itself. I think whatever learnings I had, through through my life, all that was sort of came to a crescendo in some sense, during the 3-year tenure, and it's something that I'll look back, with a lot of satisfaction.
Yeah. They say that the 2 most important days in a man's life is the day he's born and the day he finds out why. So
no, I think that will be a big statement to make. I think, I don't think I've understood my why.
I mean, you served as the CEA, which
but I mean, truth be told, to even think that, I was born because I had to be the CEA,
Okay.
I think
there's even more to life.
Not as much from the perspective of more to life, but I think that kind of thinking will build a lot of ahankar, I mean, it's so let me put it this way. being an instrument for something, good to have happened is something that I feel take a lot of satisfaction from. I really, but that's it. I think not this is the other thing that Krishna teaches as well. It is basically that don't take yourself to be the doer.
Fair. Let's leave it at that. KV sir,
Thank you.
honor, pleasure, extremely stimulating speaking with you. Thank you for being on the show and giving us so much of your time. I know you have a lot of things to do, but you still took out the time, gave us 2 incredible episodes. I hope life makes us cross paths again. Sure. And I hope you had fun. I hope I did justice to this introductory conversation with you.
I think, I enjoyed it very much. It was a very free flowing conversation, and that's something which I think, I hope, I don't know what others would think, but I think it was an honest conversation.
Yeah, no, 100%. I think it comes through after like 4 hours of being on the internet. People can pick up on the raw form of the human being, and I think that's the point of podcasts. So thank you for being a great guest, sir. Sure. Meant a lot to me and the full team. We'll see you soon.
My pleasure.
Thank you, sir. That was the episode with KV Subramanian. So I was going to return on the show. Please tell me what you thought of this particular episode. Tell me what you'd like for me to ask him the next time around. Tell me what else you'd like to hear from these economics-based conversations. I'm okay to deep dive into this subject. I'm just not too sure about what audiences truly expect out of this subject. So help me out in the comment section. TRS is going to be back soon. We're always improving with your feedback. So keep supporting, keep consuming this podcast.